And then I'd also just like to acknowledge that the Alternator is located on the unceded territory of Silk people, and just acknowledge the land that we are on. I guess here we go to get started. My name is Melanie Nugent-Noble. I am the Assistant Director at the Alternator Center for Contemporary Art. I'm also a practicing artist myself, and most recently was the City of Kelowna's Artist in Residence, and I've done a few things here and there and applied for grants with BC Arts Council and Canada Council, and I know how much work and love and care everyone puts into all their applications. And I'm looking forward to kind of sharing some of my experiences with you, and hearing about what your experiences and questions are. So I think what I'd like to do is start off with a round of introductions where everyone kind of goes around, briefly introduce yourself, introduce your practice, and kind of what you're hoping to get out of this. If you have questions specifically around timeline, budget, writing around your work, if there's anything that you're specifically stuck on, or like, what are you hoping to get out of this, and what do you want to connect with others about around this? And then I'm thinking maybe we'll spend about 15 to 20 minutes, depending on how much time we have, for each timeline, budget, and then writing about your work, and then be done. Who would like to start? I guess I will start with Coralie.
Hi, how's it going?
Hi.
Okay, yeah, I'm Coralie. I'm finishing up my degree at UBCO for the Bachelor of Fine Arts, so I'm super excited for that. And I'm joining this because I don't know, I don't know what I don't know. So
That's good.
yeah, I'm here to see what this is all about, and because I have my own idea of what a grant is and proposals and stuff, but I want to know, well, what else is hidden in there.
Are there any kind of proposals or anything that you're keeping an eye on, or things you're interested in applying for?
No, so
Don't know quite yet. Okay.
I'm gonna learn how to do that too.
Awesome. Okay, Ruben.
I'm kind of very much, it's like a kind of a carbon copy of what Coralie just said.
Okay.
I'm a fourth year BFA student in visual arts at UBCO. It's I don't know, 4 months till graduation. I'm trying to just explore, look for ways of to gain more tools, because I want to develop a independent art practice, and I'm just pretty much doing as much research as I can, learning more ways to write about my work and understanding like maybe how to not get rejected for things, I guess. I don't know.
I hear ya. Okay, Hannah.
Yeah, my name's Hannah Karen, and I'm just in the middle of setting up a multi-venue exhibit called Beauty and the Beast, and it kind of focuses on upcycling and outsider art and that sort of thing. Anyways, Heritage Museum is in, and so is Rotary Center. They just confirmed today, so pretty exciting. Now I just have to figure out how to fund this, and usually people come to me, and so I don't have to do any of this. So this time it's all new. So yeah.
Partnerships are often a really big part of proposals and creating strong proposals, but it's kind of like which comes first and putting, the cart before the horse. Like, can I start looking for partners until I have an idea and I have funding, but I can't get funding without partners or a gallery. And so that's always a funny one to kind of navigate.
Yeah.
Especially when you're starting out. I think as you kind of move on with your practice, you get a bit of a momentum, and then things kind of weave together on their own, but it takes a bit to get there.
For sure. Yeah, I think it'll be helpful. Like they've said that they'll give me letters of a blah blah. So I think that'll help.
Yeah. Mojan.
Hey, my name is Mojan. I actually work at the Alternator Center, but I am also an artist, recent graduate of UBCO. So just looking to get some opportunities to fund some projects.
Awesome. Sean.
Hey everyone. Yeah, so I'm Sean. I did my degree in sculpture in New Zealand quite a few years ago, and I've been living in Vancouver for the last 3 years or so. And I've had the opportunity to write occasionally some successful proposals, but more not successful proposals. And I think I'm trying to get an idea of what are the actual strengths and weaknesses in my proposal writing, whether it's for exhibitions or funding. Because I think I've realized that I don't actually know what's working. The proposals that I tend to think are very strong don't necessarily succeed, and the ones that I don't think are as strong sometimes do. So just trying to identify what's actually going on there.
Do you ever ask for feedback?
That's something I've been working on in the last years. Like, yeah, that's my goal this year, is to get a lot more feedback and understand what's the perspective of the people I'm writing to.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Angela.
Okay. I teach part-time at George Eliot Secondary. I teach art and I have an art practice as well. I'm kind of late to the game as far as my art practice goes, and I will be hopefully retiring in about 5 years, and I'd like to retire into my true love, which is my art making, and just learning more about how I can further my career and get some of the some of the shows and grants that I would love to have to help me make that happen. So
Awesome. Cool. Lindsay, are you there?
She is unfortunately not, but
okay.
I can give a bit of a background on what she's trying to accomplish here. She should be here shortly.
Sounds good. Or we can also just continue when she gets here. I think we can take a couple minutes for her to introduce, if that works and stuff. But yeah, no need to put you on the spot. So actually, just going back to you, Angela, I think where you are in your practice, and a lot of the folks who are here today represent our membership pretty strongly. So we've got a lot of folks who come to the Alternator, an artist run center, who have either recently finished or they're about to finish school, or we found, especially in the Okanagan, we do have, because I think we have a higher percentage of a demographic of folks who are retired or near retirement age, folks who've maybe gone and done a BFA or had introduction to art at some point, and since let's just, for this argument, say did a BFA, then went on and became teachers or accountants or something else, and now that they're retired or nearing retirement, are interested in taking a very critical look and at their practice. They're not interested in, like, for lack of a better word, being like Sunday painters. Not a hobby. People want to look at how to bring their practice forward. So yeah, there's a lot of different resources out there, and I think a lot of interesting things, like looking at terminology, especially the idea of an emerging artist doesn't necessarily need someone who's younger or under 30. So for instance, I went back to school in my 30s, and then got my master's, and for the sake of like the BC Arts Council, emerging artists and their early career development grant is for anyone who's graduated within 5 years. So that's an important thing to kind of look at. And so I was able to apply for that grant, and I was successful with that, but it doesn't necessarily mean emerging artist is someone who's at an earlier stage of their career either. So there's always ways to look at those places too. So yay. So I think everyone's just kind of looking at a very general idea of So who's actually has everyone here put together a proposal for funding before? Or no?
No.
Okay.
Mm-mm.
All right. So timelines. So I have to say too, also because this is very conversational, I didn't really put together any slides or presentations for this. So do take notes. And I'll just kind of go through a few different things. I do have some screen sharing stuff that I can share. I did put together pull up a few old budgets and such that I have done. But I think just generally going through some of the things, like they're always different, and things like giving you one template for a budget may not necessarily be in your best interest. If you're doing something that's a public artwork that requires insurance and contingency, is going to look way different than something if you're looking at studio practice and doing research for a new painting project, for instance. So it's tricky to kind of say there's one way to do things, just as, there's not just one way to be an artist, but I can kind of help figure out what are some of the key points and considerations for that. So what are some things that you generally need to think about putting in a budget? You need to think about the cost of materials, studio space, paying yourself as an artist. And that's a really big one. Does anyone have any sense of what you would pay yourself as an artist for a project? So generally, so some organizations like Canada Council say specifically, if you're traveling, for instance, they'll say you have a $500 a week stipend. Other places won't be so prescriptive where they give you a set amount, but what they'll do is, they'll just kind of look at it, what seems realistic. Like if you're, I generally, I think a good rule of thumb is about $20 to $25 an hour. But that could be different for you too, right? It depends on so many different factors, but I think making sure that you do pay yourself as an artist and you think about what a living wage is for you is a really important part, especially nowadays. That's a key component I feel like a lot of juries are looking at, is making sure that so many artists are asked to do stuff for free, and so a lot of these juries and organizations, the money is meant to go to you and your sustenance. So that's, I guess, a key point for that. Does anyone have any questions just about paying yourself as an artist, or like what that could look like, and or number of hours or costs or things that could be covered by that at this point? Not really. If not, I'll keep rambling.
What if you have a team, Melanie? Like, how do you include, do you just give one like set curator fee and then pay your team out of it? Or is it better to break it all up?
Right, that's a good question. So specifically, if you have a curator, the curator would probably need to consider CARFAC fees for the artists who they're going to be commissioning in the work. Hey, Lindsay's joined us. Hi, Lindsay. Thanks for joining us. Let's just take a little break, and not a break, but we'll hit pause on our conversation. And Lindsay, we've all done a little introduction, but it'd be great if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're here tonight. If there's anything specific around grants and proposal writing that you're interested in learning about or talking about with all of us.
Hi, so I'm Lindsay. I'm an artist in Penticton. It's only since I moved here a couple of years ago that I've gotten involved with writing proposals and being involved with projects. So this is all a new area to me, and I'm basically interested in learning everything I can, basically.
Awesome. So you just caught us, we just started talking a little bit about budgets and putting together an artist budget and some of the things that need to be considered, including paying yourself as an artist. So, you know, generally as a rule of thumb, I like to say $20 to $25 an hour. And if it's a sustained project that I'm working on, like generally I'll budget like 20 hours a week. But once again, that fully depends on, you know, if you're working full-time or part-time, or, you know, it's always very individual. So, but then Hannah asked a question just around paying a team. So once again, just making sure that people are paid fair wages. Is everyone here familiar with CARFAC?
No.
Okay, so CARFAC, I'm actually going to put a link to CARFAC, or if you want to Google search it as well, into the chat. CARFAC stands for the Canadian Artists, CARFAC BC, that's CARFAC Canada, sorry. So it's almost, you could consider it like the artists union for Canada. So they advocate for artists' rights. And one of the interesting things that they do is they have a fee schedule. That fee schedule kind of defines if you are, so it sets the fees that galleries should be paying artists for professional exhibitions. If you're licensing work out, if you're doing a performance, what should you be paid for this? So same thing, if you're hiring people, a really great resource to look at what you should be making or what to charge is CARFAC. And those kind of the fee schedule that they have there is quite, they update it every year. And it's fairly, it's, you know, comprehensive. It has a little bit of everything in there. But this is also the organization that sets the rates for like professional galleries and exhibitions. You also, for instance, for applying for a BC Arts Council, you need to have 2 shows that pay CARFAC fees under your belt before you can apply for professional funding. They might have changed that recently, but that used to be in a guideline requirement that they had. But if in doubt, you can always check with them around if you're applying to do a certain exhibition, or if you're applying to do a certain kind of thing and you're not quite sure, check with that. Just a little side note, we will be doing a specific CARFAC Alternator Chat that talks a little bit about some of the resources and tools that they have available for artists and artist rights. And that's coming up a bit later in February. I think the 4th. It's on the website. Yeah, so other things to consider when developing a budget. How big is the project? Do you need contingency? Do you need insurance? Are you charging GST? Those are things to consider. I feel like a lot of artists now working from home and writing off, you know, it might be worthwhile to look at charging GST and setting up a business. I know that's a different conversation, but it is a budgetary consideration. Studio space. Are there other skill sets that you might need? So for instance, does the work require you to extend beyond your own skill set? Do you maybe need to hire a programmer, or are there any kind of a cost associated with that? Yeah, pretty much anything and everything that could be used for production should go into a budget. Budgets are kind of almost, it's like, I'm glad we started there. They're almost like the easiest, you know, because everyone's kind of put together some sort of budget in their life, but they're kind of the most broad. So I think being as detailed as possible. Oftentimes with a lot of the budget templates that they give you, they allow you to put in notes. Use that area to put in You know, if you're saying that you're paying artist fees of $5,000, say that's 10 weeks at $20 an hour for 25 hours, or you know what I mean? Like, so be as specific as you can with the information that you put in the budget. If you're putting a contingency, you know, put the specific items that you might be considering to go into that contingency. If you have insurance that you need to get, or if you have a studio space that you're renting, make sure you get those quotes and have them available. Sometimes they need them to be attached. Not very often, but it's handy just to have that information. A lot of the people who are often looking at these are experienced artists or are folks who also kind of know the cost. Like they're people who will work in similar disciplines. And so try and be as, I guess, honest and vulnerable with the budget as possible, just as forthcoming with everything. It's not necessarily the cheaper the work, you know, it's not about doing a cheap bid. Don't try and undersell your work. I don't think that does any value to you or to the arts. Does anyone have any questions at this point? No? Okay. I might kind of move into thinking about timelines a little bit. Does anyone have any specific thoughts or ideas around timelines? I know similarly to budgets, they're pretty straightforward.
Yeah, I usually do it like backwards. So I start at my end point and then move back, and that's usually really helpful, I find.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think for timelines, it's always kind of thinking, it's interesting if you have, oftentimes timelines are defined by if you have a commitment. So for instance, an exhibition that you're working from or some kind of partnership. That's helped kind of defining what that looks like. And I think looking at project timelines, but then also thinking about the timelines in relation to the projects that you're developing too. So my experience when I was starting out, I was applying for things that I wanted to do in a few months, where now I find I'm applying for things a couple years in advance.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think as you start to build your practice and you start building momentum and planning kind of, it just, the timeline extends, right? And then as you're applying for different exhibitions and stuff too, it also, you know, the more partnerships, the more kind of pieces there are, the longer it takes too. So thinking about where the budget or where the proposal falls on your project timeline as a whole too. So in giving enough leeway for that, especially organizations like the BC Arts Council. So they have a few different like streams that you can apply to, but they only do a single intake a year. So if you have a project that you want to apply for professional development, it's in November, it's November 15th. So if you have something now that you want to apply for through their professional stream, that's a project, you have to wait now till next November to apply. So you almost need to start thinking a bit longer term about when you're applying for things. The next intake, I think, for your early career development is July. So if any of you guys, especially if you're still in school or just finishing, you know, that's one to keep an eye on. I'm also going to put a link to the BC Arts Council grant page here for you guys to look at the different grants that are there. So this is just to the early career development one here. But you can take from this, you can navigate to any of the other grants too. And just check out what they have, some of their language around proposals and stuff like that. So yeah, I think for me, timeline often is defined by budget. And so looking at how long can I pay myself to work on this? So if it's $12,000 project, you know, generally that's going to be like 3 or 4 months of me paying myself. And then maybe I know materials will be $5,000 or $6,000, right? And all the other things. So, you know, it might not always work out that half of it is your artist fees, but I kind of always use that as a bit of a guide for writing my proposals, especially if they're a lot of what I do is more research based and maybe not necessarily as attached to final shows or outcomes. Of course, if you do have final shows or outcomes, you align to that first. And just kind of like, as you said, Hannah, work backwards from there. It's always important to consider timelines and work with the different partners that you have. Yeah, and is there anything, I don't know, is there anything specific that people are interested in around timelines and or formatting or anything like that? I feel like writing is kind of like the big piece.
Yeah.
That's always the biggest challenge for folks. Let's see. Yeah, so yeah, but timelines are timelines, I guess. Let me just see if there's one here that I can share with you guys. So actually, oh, I think I closed it, history. Okay. Sorry, guys. I'll look that up in a bit. Okay, so should we just jump right into writing? Okay. Why not? I've always found writing to be one of the more challenging parts, especially a lot of proposals want you to describe more with less. Like, provide a full description of your project in like 250 words, and it's incredible. It's incredibly difficult to be concise and get like to communicate what your work is about with doing the justice that you want to do it. I know you put so much time and energy and thought into how you talk and speak and think about your work. And oftentimes looking at proposals, a lot of folks who are on juries are like, they don't know you, they don't know your practice. This might be the first time that they've heard about you. So you can't assume that they know everything or anything about you. So one of the best ways that I've always thought about writing about my work is writing for someone who doesn't know me at all, and just not assuming that people know my work. And being very clear, like my first sentence or my first few sentences are always describing what the project is. So for instance, from June to December, I'm going to be producing this artwork and then showing it through 5 different performances. So being very specific about what the money and funding is going to be used for and what the deliverables are for, rather than the more conceptual ideas. So putting forward something that the jurors can look at and kind of get a sense of exactly the logistics of what you're doing, I think is really important, just so there's something for them to kind of grasp onto. What else was I gonna say around that?
Can I actually ask a quick question about that one?
Sure.
So do you think that applies as well in proposal writing for exhibitions as much as it does in grant writing?
I think so. I think too, yeah, like I propose to, yeah, and it doesn't need to be a long sentence. It's really like, I propose to install a machine that does XYZ in the gallery that people can walk around. Then you go into, you know, so people actually just have something straightforward that they can kind of grasp on. The other thing too, like, has anyone here ever done residencies? Participated in a residency? So when I was at so I've done a few residencies at the BAMP Center, and there they have this big dining room table, and every night or 3 meals a day, you go and you sit with other people who are there. They have hundreds of people there from different disciplines. They'll have opera singers, they'll have visual artists, they'll have leadership conference attendees, and you never know who you're going to be sitting with. And so every day at lunch, you're regularly with strangers, and you have these micro conversations with people who are like, oh, what do you do? Tell me about your practice. What are you doing here? And you get really good at listening to what the questions are that people ask over and over, and then starting to talk about those things first, you know? And I think one of the best things that you can do for writing about your work is having these micro conversations with people. And it's one of the things I was hoping that we could do today, but I couldn't quite figure out how we could do it. So is where we all kind of like switch off and we spend a minute or two describing our work, and then a minute or two for someone to ask questions, and then we switch. So having that repetitive process of talking about our work with other people and getting that automatic feedback. Because you know when people are like, oh, I don't quite get it, or that seems really conceptual, or, you know, if people are always coming back to you with the same questions, that's information that you need to put up front or think about writing about first, if that makes sense, if that's helpful. And I was thinking about, I wish we were all in person, because I had a nifty little exercise, and then, you know, this whole Zoom room thing is like a whole other thing. But that's one thing I would definitely encourage for people to try is just trying to talk to as many people about your work, and just have like even like 1,000 coffees kind of thing, just to kind of talk about these a specific project that you might have. Yeah, and then also thinking about just writing about your work, starting with a very broad statement. I'd like, so generally too, like splitting your writing into 2 sections. One that talks about the logistics of your project, I think is really handy, just as like a starting point. So this project is a series of 5 paintings. The paintings are each 5 feet by 10 feet. They're going to be hung on these walls, and people will, you know, and, you know, just the very logistics that don't really tell too much. And then, you know, that don't provide too much context or anything. And then another part that is all context. These paintings are referential of XYZ, or what's your kind of your curatorial statement? What makes this work relevant at this time and at this place in this social context? Those kind of things. And I find by generally having my work written about in 2 ways, most applications have their processes, or sorry, have their descriptions set out in that kind of format. So they're like, describe the work. What are the motivations behind the work? Or some kind of different format of those 2 questions, right? So when they're asking you to describe the work, you might generally focus more on those kind of logistic things. And then the motivation would be a second part or a second question. And then I think once you have all that, like, and make it as long as you want it, those two kind of sections, and then, you know, or let's say do one that's 500 words each, 500 word description of the work or what you're trying to do, 500 word description of your motivation, and then pare that down. Take each of those, make the description 250 words and make the motivation 250 words, and then pare it down again to 100 words and 100 words. And then I always find like that makes you think about the words that you choose and how, what's most important about what you say about your work, by just kind of going through that writing exercise of like constricting the writing further down and making it a bit, it's hard, but it's like, what's the important thing that you're saying, and doing so in the clearest way. So it helps you kind of like finesse your language. I think one of the things, so just backing up a little bit in my own history, previous to going back to Emily Carr and doing my master's, I worked in government for 8 years with the province of BC. And so I was quite versed in government writing. And then going back into like very bureaucratic and very clear kind of writing, you know, that's, what is this? Doing briefing notes. What is this? Why is it important? You know, and just the bare facts. And then also having to have this artist hat on while I was going back to school and doing artist writing, which is a lot more descriptive and not necessarily as accessible. And so I find that's often a challenge, is trying to figure out how to make this arts writing more accessible, and more clear and more logical. I feel like oftentimes in school you're taught like the writing's a lot more flowery, I guess, or just like descriptive, or like there's a specific way of doing art writing, right? That, I don't know. It's just not as accessible. Sorry. So just trying to be as clear and concise and try and approach your writing about your work as a bureaucrat or someone who's trying to explain your work to someone who doesn't necessarily, know your work.
Melanie?
Yeah.
Are the people on the committees looking at the proposals, are they artists themselves, or are they more of a bureaucratic type? And so you're saying not to use the arty-farty, flowery language that we often see in artist statements and things like that. You want to be more concise and straightforward, right?
Yeah. I find people often are artists, but still, they still don't know you and they don't know your practice. Right. And I feel too, I think when a lot of people lead with kind of the more artistic writing, you oftentimes there's so many proposals. There's could be 50 proposals that they're reading. You know, how do you make it clear exactly what you're doing and build on that? Like, it's just, you don't want people to search for what you're doing. So if they're trying to read through, like, if they're trying to read through something and they have trouble finding what you're actually doing, that's not necessarily as good. Like, make it clear right off the bat what you're trying to do. Just, and the more that you can try and condense and make your writing, like, don't lose yourself in the writing, but yeah, it's hard. It's really hard. I've had the hardest time figuring out how to write. The project I ended up doing with the city is one that I ended up, I've applied, maybe this is the 5th or 6th time that I've applied for something. And it was always a challenge trying to write about it in a way that fit the word count. Really, it was a matter of just trying to figure out how to write about it in a way that people could get it, and understand what it's about. So for instance, the project included the production and development of a series of beacons, whereas if you have one and I have one and we're within proximity of each other, they begin to glow and they get brighter as we get closer together. So being able to take that idea as a starting kind of introduction and then go into what it means. So it's about community capacity building. It's about connecting people through technology in different ways. Like there's, you know, things that were going on with COVID. Those are things that are details that people can build around the core concept, I guess. So I guess, yeah, just positioning your ideas and being as clear as possible, and trying to put, yeah, the artsy writing I find can get in the way of the core ideas a lot of times. And I think that's where a lot of artists can kind of get a bit lost. And I think that too, it's easy to get in your head around how, because I know as an artist, I love my work and I know what I want to say about it and what's important, or what I feel is important, but not everyone necessarily will get that from the writing. They're looking at a piece of paper. You know what I mean? You just have to be as kind of harsh with yourself and with your writing, and just try and be as like bare bones around like it's a painting, you know, like just don't be as clear, be as flat with it, and then build upon that, if that makes sense. Sorry if that's do I have any questions kind of around writing or anything that we can kind of like, yeah, dig a bit deeper on at all? Does anyone have any questions around artists? Mojan.
I don't have a question, but I just, one piece of advice that because I started applying for grants and such this year, one thing that I came across was know like who you're applying for and who you're writing to. So whether it's like a exhibition, just give me a second, sorry. Whether it's an exhibition or you're applying for grant funding or whatever, like know what the organization is and look at past like successful applicants or exhibitions that have been on at that place, because then you know how to write for that place as well.
Yeah, it's always important to kind of look at what the artists, or yeah, research the organization. And I think too, like less is more in a way, like, or not less is more, but like my first year, I kind of applied to a whole bunch of artist run centers my first year after school. And I was turned away from all of them. Like I didn't get a single exhibition. And so I took the approach of being more thoughtful and applying to 2 or 3, and really just focusing on those and really honing in and spending a few months on those applications, rather than just putting a whole bunch out there. Yeah, but that takes time, finessing applications for each organization. But I think in the long run, it's really worth it. Yeah, and doing all that research.
So can I jump in with a question here?
Yeah.
So in that specificity to a gallery, how are you relating your proposal to their individual spaces? How connected are those two things? Like, does your practice and what you're writing about have to relate somehow to the space, or are you proposing a site-specific work, or how do you relate your intention to their space?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think it depends from gallery to gallery, but I think just thinking like in the broadest kind of curatorial kind of question, telling them why this work is relevant at that time and in that gallery. So does that kind of make sense? Just kind of, as long as you can kind of speak to those two kind of questions and kind of your motivation, statement as well. I think that helps. You know, the alternator, for example, we have a mandate which is around being experimental, but I don't know if it necessarily is of value for someone to say my work is experimental. You know, they need to say they have to demonstrate it rather than say it.
Okay.
Yeah. Does that
Thanks.
help? Does
Yeah,
that?
it does. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Any other questions about writing? Yeah. Lindsay.
I didn't go to art school. I'm self-taught, so I'm still learning about how to talk about myself and my art. And with COVID happening, it's very hard to get into conversations with people about work nowadays. So you had mentioned talk to as many people as possible about what you're doing, and that helps you define it. So given that that's kind of difficult to do right now, what would you suggest for learning how to kind of think about my work and how I want to express it? It's all pretty new to me.
Well, let's take a first stab of it right now. Do you want to take a couple minutes and just kind of tell us a little bit about what you're working on and things you're looking at applying for, and we can kind
Well,
of.
I'm sorry, I'm not looking at applying at anything at this moment. I'm primarily a comic artist. I do cartoons and comic strips. My focus is on comics for children. I'm working on a series of informational comics about local wildlife. I've done osprey, salmon. I'm working on one about bats right now, and basically it's localized for the Okanagan, and just teaching kids about the wildlife that there is in the world around them. Like, for example, the salmon, I talked about how they were working on reintroducing the kokanee to Okanagan Lake, and I would like to work with the nation here on a comic about their efforts to do that, because they're the ones who have been working on that. And I also am working on some comics on topics that people don't really talk to kids about. For example, one about periods and menstruation. When my kids were younger, they're both boys, and there are no resources for here is the mechanics of what happens. It's all for girls and marketed towards girls. Like, here's what's going to happen when your body changes. But they just wanted to know, what is this about? So I am working on a bit of a longer comic about that.
So
yeah, that's
cool. So yeah, I guess maybe we'll just do a really, really quick round. Do people have, everyone else, do you have a question for Lindsay? A single question that you have about what she said?
I have one.
Yeah, Hannah.
Lindsay, I was just wondering, what's your style? Like, do you do like anime or what?
And Lindsay, I don't want you to answer. Just consider it for your writing. Angela, do you have a question? And we'll go around, we'll do this for everyone after Lindsay. Angela, do you have a question?
I'd like to know what kind of medium you're working in, what your materials are that you're using.
Okay. Mojan? I know you had to step out a little bit too, so I'm not sure if you heard the whole thing.
Yeah, I'll come back. I got to think of a question.
Okay. Sean?
I guess, how do you see these works being distributed? Is it sort of mass printed, mass media, or how do you share your work?
Coralie? Okay, I'm not sure what happened. Not sure what happened with Coralie. Ruben? No questions? Okay. Oh, Coralie?
No, I'm still here.
Okay. Just wondering if you had any questions for Lindsay about what she said about her practice.
Nope.
Okay. Did you find that helpful?
I did. Yeah, I have some talking notes I can think about now.
Cool. And yeah, that's kind of an example of thinking about how talking about your work can help you. All the questions were pretty logistical. or like fairly easy details to add, right? And so if you find people are often asking the same questions, you can start working that into your writing and putting that information more upfront. Sean, do you want to go next? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry, yeah. So my work, I tend to take a multidisciplinary approach. Like my education is in sculpture, but I'm in the studio right now. There's a lot of plaster works and a lot of photography and a little bit of painting as well. But my work tends to draw a little bit in equal parts from sculpture and collage and photography. So a lot of the time there could be panels that are both printed and painted, or use sculptural materials like plaster and embed other materials inside it. Photos tend to take the same approach, where it might be multiple layers of photos collaged together, either digitally or physically. So it's sort of they're all kind of a multifaceted approach to these assemblages of materials. Yeah.
Cool. Questions? So, oh, Lindsay.
What kind of subjects does your work focus on?
My question is, how are your work? Yeah. Where do you find your materials?
My question is about scale, if you're working in large formats or if they're smaller, and how they're viewed.
And if you're doing like a series, if you work more in individual pieces, or if you work on series.
Okay. Mojan.
Hey, my internet's kind of bad, so sorry if I cut out. So my work primarily in the realms of painting and screen printing, usually about identity, positionality, and social justice, whether it's in a personal context or a broader kind of umbrella of those themes.
All right. Anyone want to go first? Okay. Can you, identity is a pretty broad term. Can you kind of speak to that a little bit? And then
Speak to it now, or like?
No, just kind of, I guess in the, question sense. It's all good. I think too, like a lot of, and this is just a side note, I think identity, a lot of big terms, especially coming out of art school, it's like I focused a lot on identity too when I was coming out looking at, but I was approaching identity through policy. I used to work in multiculturalism and anti-racism with the government and stuff. And I think that it's easy to take those bigger terms and break them up or personalize them, or, just dig into them a bit more. Because a lot of artists work with themes of identity. And so you need to be more fulsome with your language around it. Yeah. Special note on identity. Yeah.
I was just going to ask if it was more like identity about yourself, or having people question their identity or other identities, and how personal it is to you.
Hannah?
My question was more because I know we have to wrap it up by 6 o'clock. Yeah.
Yep.
So I was just wondering if you were going to give us some suggestions as to where we can apply for grants.
Yeah. So I have a few lists here. So I can go through these really quick if you guys. So definitely check out BC Arts Council. They've got a few different calls open right now. They've got a new grant called the Pivot Grant. It's $12,000. I think the deadline is February 16th, but it's specifically for artists whose works have been impacted by COVID-19. In production or in context, you'll have to take a closer look. But I feel like it's a special grant this year. They also have a micro grant program that's up for funding up to $1,500 that's open right now for individual artists. They also have professional development grants. So those are things that would help you with residencies, help you kind of develop your practice. So oftentimes grants can be looked at as in terms of professional development, so helping you build your practice versus doing a specific project. So professional development would be maybe around doing a residency or something like that. And then your early career development grant, like I said, is for folks who have been out of school for at least 5 years or under 30 years of age. So there's a few different either ors for who can qualify for that grant. That one's up for up to $30,000. And it's more to give you like a good year or so to sustain, because they recognize that you're not making money your first few years of practice and that you're still looking at different ways to find your way as an artist. So that's through the BC Arts Council. There's also, so Canada Council is a bit different. So you need to apply first to Canada Council. So they have a portal. So you would apply on there. You have to submit like some photos and an artist residency or an artist CV, and they kind of qualify you as an artist in a way, and for different programs. So from that, they might look at it and say, okay, well, you're qualified to apply for our research and creation, our arts abroad, and our theater programs, you know, so based on what you provide and what your background is. And so they have different streams. And so based on that and based on those streams, there are different qualifications as well. Canada Council has several different intake periods a year. So I think, for instance, research and creation is 3 times a year. But you can apply anytime prior to that deadline for it to be reviewed in that next chunk. So they don't really have a deadline. You can apply at any time in the year. It's just the deadline kind of solidifies when it's going to be reviewed and in what kind of chunk of money. Grants also generally take a few months, like up to 6 months to get feedback. So, and oftentimes they don't cover funding that's taken, they don't allow you to fund any activities that have already taken place before the grant has started. So for Canada Council, that means anything that's taken place before you've applied. So if the application deadline is March 1st, you can't claim any activities that were done before in February. So make sure that you look at that and you look at the timelines. Other grants are specific to the time that the grant is awarded. So those are other things to look at and think about the timeline. Those are kind of the main ones. In terms of looking at like City of Kelowna artists and residencies or any other residencies or pots of funding, they will all have their own requirements. They all follow a very kind of similar, you know, format, but be sure to read all the details. The other thing too is make sure you do contact folks, program officers. Like BC Arts Council and Canada Council have program officers who are there, and their job is to help you succeed. They don't want people to submit bad proposals. their job is to help you, and they want all applications to be great applications, and the jurors are all looking at great applications. They don't want you to not be successful because you were applying to the wrong stream. And actually, like, they're very helpful in that way too. There's times where I've talked to them and I've been like, I'm thinking of applying for this stream. They're like, actually, that's not right because of this weird bureaucratic thing. Apply to this stream as well. And, you know, yeah, it's always handy to call your program officer. They can't tell you if your application is good or bad, and they are very good at kind of like, you know, using language that kind of facilitates that. But yeah, be sure to always contact program officer. They're very helpful and very encouraging, I find, for the most part. Yeah. 601, is there any kind of last feedback or thoughts or ideas that people had? I also want to let you know, if you do have anything that comes up in the next, any questions that come up, you can always contact us at info@alternatorcenter.com. And we're happy to help you, or you can, stop into the gallery next time we're allowed face-to-face. And we're hoping to be doing more of these sessions coming up. We have a few others coming up in the Alternator Chat series. We've got one coming up next week for call for submission specifically to the Alternator. We've got tax tips for artists. We've got one with folks from CARFAC, and then a few other ones. They're all listed on our website. Thanks. And yeah, if you have any other feedback or anything, yeah.
I have one quick question.
Sure.
Can you reuse applications? So say you've made a proposal and you didn't get accepted. Can you tweak that or change it and then reapply, or will they notice that kind of thing?
Oftentimes they have some kind of specific feedback around that. So for instance, Canada Council will allow you to apply for a same or similar project twice. And if it's unsuccessful both times, then move on is pretty much what they say. But if it's not successful the first time, it needs some tweaking or more details, or that's a time to get feedback and then apply based on their feedback if you think that that's worthwhile. Yeah, so good question. Yeah. Any other last questions or thoughts? No? Okay, well, thank you everyone so much for taking the time. I hope that you found this useful, and I hope that we left you with some handy tips and tricks and some ways of thinking about writing. And if you ever do have any questions, the Alternator is a really great resource. We're all artists, we're all struggling with the same thing. And we, love talking about art. So you can contact us at the gallery at any time. We're happy to help.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you very much.
This was great.
Yeah, thank you.
And thank you. It was a great session.
Oh, glad you enjoyed it. Any feedback, let us know, good or bad, because it's all one big experiment for us too, this whole new COVID thing, and how do we support artists? And these are conversations we used to have on like one-on-one in the gallery. And now we're trying to figure out how do we have these conversations in this new crazy time. Anyways, okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.
Melanie.
Bye.